Star Fox, a series that is near and dear to my heart. Even its debatable worst entry, Star Fox Adventures, is a game that I spent a ton of time playing. I've probably played through the entire game 5 or 6 times, and I still enjoy experiencing that world. But oh man, that is not what you would call a Star Fox game. But what about Star Fox Command and Star Fox Assault, and even Star Fox Zero? What's wrong with those entries? Why is the Star Fox series failing so often? What can Nintendo do to save Star Fox? Let's find out. I'll say this first, Starlink is not going to make or break the Star Fox series. The game is probably inconsequential to the success or failure of the Star Fox series, as well as whether or not we're going to get another installment in the series. I think we can all agree that the Star Fox series was at its strongest with Star Fox 64. It took everything we loved, or wanted to love, from the original Star Fox, combined a few aspects from Star Fox 2, and basically rebooted the series. So why was it so good? I think it really benefited from a very simple design premise, with a hint of player choice and discovery. If you just went mission by mission, destroying enemies as they appear, you would be treated with a series of great, thematically varied levels with a pretty decent difficulty curve. The beauty was what happened if you strayed off the beaten path. You may have discovered some alternate paths, different characters, and of course, significantly harder levels and bosses. This creates what I call the playground effect. Before the internet had the ability to spoil everything before you even purchased a game, the playground was where you found out the true hidden secrets of video games. These are often called water cooler moments now, where you and your friends describe something crazy that happened in your last Destiny raid, or when Rathalos killed you and a friend while you were hunting a purple Pikachu in Monster Hunter, or whatever. I'll never forget when my camp counselor told me that you could fight the real Andross if you took the left path. I spent the next several weeks plugging away at the first few levels until I finally learned how to find and defeat the true villain. These moments have all but been completely removed from the series. Assault had just 10 levels, and while those levels are great, there's little to no variance in each run. The same can be said for Zero. Great levels that are all too similar each time. Remember when people were complaining that Nintendo was just trying to remake Ocarina of Time over and over and over again? I think the Star Fox series is falling victim to the same kind of problem, and that's why I think the series is failing. We played Star Fox 64 in the 90s when the series was at its best. We don't need to play it again and again and again. So how do we save this poor animal from extinction? First of all, do something else. Dare to be different. We don't need to play Star Fox 64 4. As much as Star Fox Adventures and Assault strayed from the formula, I appreciate what they were doing. So what are some new things they can do? Well, let's start with story. I would challenge them to go to uncharted lands. I think we've done almost all we can do within the Lylat system. We know the sectors and all the significant planets, so I think they're going to struggle surprising us if we stay in Lylat. Controversial as Star Fox Adventures was, Dinosaur Planet was fantastic. I loved how different the wildlife was, and General Scales had a lot of potential to be a great new villain. I know it was not originally a Star Fox game, but I think that's exactly what kind of shift the story needed. Picture this. The opening sequence features an intro where Fox, Slippy, and let's just say Crystal are slowly introduced one by one. They're all in different quarters, but they're not on the Great Fox. They're in like a military base on Corneria. General Pepper calls them in for a meeting. They've discovered a new threat at the edge of the Lylat system. It appears as though they've received a distress signal from an abandoned military base on Katina. The team concludes that it's likely Bill, a former ally of the Star Fox team, but upon arrival, there's no one to be found. They make their way to the control room where they are greeted by a hologram. It's a transmission from none other than Falco Lombardi, a now ex-member of the Star Fox team. He informs you that after leaving the team, he discovered an unknown military faction on the outskirts of the Lylat system. He's masked himself as one of their own to discover their intentions. He can't say anything more and gives you coordinates to meet him at a safe place. I know this kind of sounds ridiculous and a little bit like Star Fox Adventures, but I wouldn't say it's any more ridiculous than something like Star Wars. And to be honest, I think Star Fox Adventures had one of the better plots as far as the Star Fox series is concerned. So bear with me and let's continue. Fox and his team are about to leave when suddenly the very same forces that Falco informed them about arrive on Katina for an ambush. This brings us to the first major combat sequence of the game, where you need to defend yourselves and eventually make your escape back to the Great Fox. Now the team thinks that Falco might have set a trap for them. You, the player, have no idea if Falco is an ally or not. If he is an ally, does that mean the enemy knows that he's a fake? Or is it perhaps simply because this new faction wanted to check out the distress signal for themselves? The only way to find out is to head to the coordinates Falco provided you. This brings you to the good old asteroid belt sequence, where you have to make your way past the military space fleet and sneak down onto the planet. That's just a taste of where I think the story could go in the very early stage, and what thematic elements I'd like to see them experiment with. Once Fox actually meets up with Falco, they would essentially have a standoff because Fox is not sure if he can really trust him. Now, at first, a more story-focused game sounds like a great change for Star Fox. The downside is that the game would be following a strict narrative. It could mean that creating several branching paths could be quite difficult. So I would expect the majority of the story exposition would happen at the beginning of the game, and they wrap it up at the end. Alternatively, the different paths you take could just tell a completely unique story. Think Star Fox Command and its multiple endings. But let's leave the story alone for now and talk about gameplay. I think it might be time to adopt a traditional control scheme. Zero was on the right track until they added the motion controls, and that's kind of a divisive issue. But other than Zero, Nintendo has kept the same control setup since the N64, with blasters on A, rolling on R, etc. But if you look at something like Battlefront, they've essentially adopted first-person shooter controls into their space combat. As much as I would like to see a complete overhaul of controls, I think it does make sense to base the controls off of the old Star Fox method, with maybe a few changes. I think it's actually best to keep movement and aiming on the same stick, meaning you can only fire in the direction you are traveling in. Visually, it makes sense as the blasters are on the front of the aircraft. That keeps basic firing simple and approachable for all players, which has always been something Nintendo strives for. If I'm not mistaken, Star Fox Zero used the right stick as a throttle, which is simple and intuitive. Pressing up would give you a boost, and down for braking. I think I like the idea of moving firing to the R button. It makes sense, as it's basically a trigger and every other shooter is pretty much doing that already, so I think most gamers can wrap their minds around that. I'm not opposed to them keeping firing on A, but I prefer being able to change speed and firing at the same time, and your thumb can only do so much. Bombs could move to ZR, barrel rolls on L, which is also used for banking, and this could be used in conjunction with the right stick for specific maneuvers. And perhaps ZL is just auto loop, saving you an input, and it would be used a lot. So I'm not really sure what the right answer is when it comes to controls. I think both control schemes could work, and they would probably just let you do both. They just need to be aware that any decisions they make in level design are not impacted by the use of either control scheme. For example, if you're expected to boost and shoot at the same time in a specific spot in the game, you can't really do that if A is shoot and boost is X or something. Now let's discuss the elephant in the room, pilot mode. This is probably the most divisive issue amongst fans. I personally like it as it allows the game to shrink down to a smaller scale, meaning ship-based enemies become a larger threat, and the developers can introduce new grounded units. It also gives a lot of diversity in level design, as we could have an on-foot stealth sequence where you need to hack an enemy terminal in a military base. It also gave us those epic sequences in Star Fox Assault where Fox is standing on the wing of a ship using a massive blaster to fight off the aperoids. Such a cool, video gamey type moment, and they could definitely do a lot of things with that. I think pilot mode could be amazing if they went all in on it. If they spend a lot of time making those levels interesting and really put a lot of care into pilot mode. It could even be the basis for multiplayer. They would basically have their own version of Battlefield. On the topic of multiplayer, I think that's probably the biggest opportunity to save the series. They can apply basic shooter multiplayer modes, and then decide whether or not it's pilot only, or if it's vehicle combat, or both. They could even go as far as to have different classes. Everyone starts with Fox, He's well-rounded stat-wise and has no major flaws. You unlock more characters or costumes as you level up, which slightly affect your character's stats, give you different abilities, etc. As long as the core gameplay is solid, they can do whatever they want with multiplayer. They just need to make sure the online multiplayer itself is solid and there's no connection issues. As much as people hate pilot mode, I think there's a lot of potential there, and I will take pilot mode over the weird hovercraft in Star Fox Zero any day of the week. However, I do think they could get around pilot mode by keeping the transformation mechanic from Zero, but replace the goofy chicken walker with something closer to a mech. Or perhaps each character has a different mech form. Fox turns into a humanoid mech, whereas Falco keeps the chicken, Slippy gets a froggish mech that just jumps higher than others, and Crystal gets a small, agile stealth mech. This could be applied in both single-player and multiplayer modes. It makes each playable unit feel unique in multiplayer and gives single-player missions more variety. They could even have a challenge mode where you and a few friends take on waves of enemies in different levels. For one mission, you need to defend a train as it crosses into enemy territory, while another mission sees your team defending the Great Fox from missile strikes, a nice homage to the Sector Z mission from Star Fox 64. Challenge mode would actually be the ideal way of implementing throwback missions. They could take the Katina mission from Star Fox 64 and have part of your team in the air taking out enemy ships, while the remainder of your team is on the ground, working on exposing the weak point of the mothership. You could create a similar mission based on Fachina from Star Fox Assault. There's so many options, and it lets Nintendo fill their game with nostalgia while still giving us a new single-player campaign. And with that, I think I've said everything I can on the matter. I think the mech angle would give them a nice gimmick while still being entertaining. It's a good substitute for pilot mode, but still fills that gameplay gap. Let me know what you guys think about the ideas. Am I completely loony? Do you agree, disagree, or have your own brilliant ideas? I'd love to hear them. If you like these theory crafting style videos, then consider subscribing and taking a look at some of my previous videos. I have a lot of videos in this style coming, so stay tuned for those. Leaving a like also helps out a ton, and sharing and all that stuff, you know how it goes. But above all, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon. Cat, why are you meowing at me? For one mission, you need... Oh, cats, why?